You're an idiot and stupid, Dad. My son's voice cracked through the air like lightning in a quiet sky. He stood in the middle of the living room, his chest heaving, eyes burning with a rage I couldn't recognize. He had that look, the one people wear when they think they've finally grown too big for the hands that once held them. I just stood there, near the old wooden cabinet, my palms resting on the cane I barely needed anymore. My silence made him louder. You think you know everything because you're old? You can't even use a phone right, can't drive without getting lost, can't do anything. He was pacing now, pointing at me like I was a stranger trespassing in his world. You're useless, Dad, just useless. His words sliced through the quiet house. It used to be filled with laughter, the smell of breakfast on Sundays and music playing from that old radio near the window. Now it just echoed with the sound of pride and betrayal. I looked around slowly. The leather couch he was standing beside, I bought that when he graduated. The glass table he kicked just now. I spent my bonus on that after 20 years in the factory. Even the walls, painted cream and grey, carried the brush marks of my own hands. This was more than a house. It was a lifetime of effort, and he was spitting on it like it meant nothing. He came closer, his jaw tight, his voice shaking. You just sit here acting like some wise man, but you're nothing. I pay the bills now. I make the money. You should thank me for letting you stay here this long. His friends stood behind him, 3 of them leaning on the wall. They looked awkward, one of them with a phone halfway out recording, pretending to cough to hide his smirk. They wanted a show. And my son was giving them one. I took a slow breath, steady and quiet. He didn't know that kind of calm comes only from years of struggle. You don't raise your voice when you've already survived louder storms. He stepped forward again. I'm done taking care of an old fool. You hear me? Done! Then with one rough shove, he pushed the small box I kept near the couch, the one filled with my things, toward me. Here, take this junk with you. The box toppled, spilling old photos, receipts, a pair of reading glasses, and a faded tie his mother once gave me. The sound of glass breaking echoed across the room. My son flinched, and for a second, maybe out of guilt, but he caught his friend's eyes and straightened up again. Pride doesn't let young men stay human for long. I slowly bent down, picked up one of the photos. It was of him, maybe 7 or 8, holding my hand in front of the old truck we used to fix together. He had the same smile I was looking for now, but it was gone. Buried under arrogance, under the illusion that youth means power. I placed the photo carefully back in the box and stood straight. He crossed his arms, waiting for me to argue, but I didn't. Instead, I looked him dead in the eyes and said softly, "Are you done?" He scoffed. "Yeah, I said what I had to say." His tone was like a final nail being driven in. He wanted to win an argument I wasn't having. I nodded slowly. "All right then." That was all I said. Then I reached for my old brown coat hanging near the door. The same coat I wore the day I bought this house. I brushed off the dust, slipped it on, buttoned it carefully, as if I was preparing for something important. The room was silent except for the rustle of the fabric and the ticking clock on the wall. He didn't notice how still his friends had gone. They were realizing something he still didn't, that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's warning. I grabbed my hat, the same one I'd worn for years. As I put it on, I caught my reflection in the mirror near the hallway. Older, tired maybe, but not weak. Never weak. I turned to him one last time. He looked uncomfortable now, shifting on his feet, pretending to stay confident. "You think I'm stupid," I said quietly. "And maybe to you I am. But one day you'll learn what real stupidity looks like." He frowned, confused. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I opened the door. The cold air hit me like a memory. It smelled of rain and wet concrete, the kind of air that wakes you up. Behind me, I heard his voice again. "Don't come back. You're done here." The door slammed. The sound echoed down the empty street as I stepped outside. The house stood behind me, glowing with warm light, but it felt hollow like a stage after the show's over. I didn't look back. Not even once. I walked down the path, passing the fence I'd fixed with him when he was 16. He was laughing then, saying he'd never leave his old man alone. Funny how promises rot faster than wood. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out and stared at the screen. A familiar name appeared. Someone who owed me a favor. Someone who knew exactly what I owned and what my son didn't. I pressed call. The ring barely lasted 2 seconds before it connected. A calm voice answered. Yes, sir? I looked up at the sky. The clouds were breaking, the first hint of light pushing through. My voice stayed steady. It's time. Start the process. Understood. I hung up, slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and kept walking. He thought he kicked me out of his house, but what he didn't know was that he had just kicked himself out of mine. The night after I left, the city felt quieter than it used to. The streetlights hummed faintly, painting long yellow lines across the sidewalk. I walked without hurry, one hand in my coat pocket, the other holding that old leather bag and the one my son had tossed like trash. I wasn't angry. No, anger burns fast. What I felt was something heavier, slower, the kind of silence that comes when you realize you've done everything you could, and still lost something you loved. I walked to the small apartment above my friend's auto shop. Old building, cracked paint, but it was mine for as long as I wanted. He greeted me at the door, asked what happened, but I just shook my head. Just need a quiet place for a while, I said. He didn't press. Men who've seen real life don't need explanations. They see it in your eyes, that mix of peace and pain. That night I sat by the window watching headlights drift by, each one disappearing into the dark. My hands rested on my knees, the light from the street below catching the lines in my skin. Every wrinkle had a story. Every scar had a reason, and none of it made me useless. I reached into my bag and took out a folder. Inside were papers, documents I'd kept safe for years, deeds, accounts, shares. My son never cared to ask how I managed to retire comfortably, or how the bills got paid before he took over. He thought I lived off him. He never looked deep enough to see that the house, the land, the company shares all bore my name. I ran a finger across one document, the property deed. His house. My house, I smiled faintly. There was no joy in it. Just truth. Quiet, solid, unbothered truth. Over the next few days, I went about my life as usual. I helped at the shop, fixed an old carburetor, had lunch with a few men who still called me boss out of habit. They respected me not because of money, but because of how I carried it. Meanwhile, I heard small things, whispers from the neighborhood, small cracks forming in my son's perfect image. Late bill payments, unanswered calls from the bank. One of his friends got arrested for some scheme. And my son? He kept smiling for show, posting pictures online, pretending everything was fine. But pride doesn't feed you. It only starves you slower. A week later, I got a call from the same lawyer who helped me draw up the estate plan years ago. Mr. Carter, he said, his tone careful. Are you sure you still want to go through with the transfer? Yes, I said softly, looking out at the street. Start it tomorrow. Let everything revert. He paused, then said, Understood. That night I sat outside the shop, the wind brushing against my face. The moon was full, bright against the dark sky. I could almost hear my late wife's voice in the quiet, gentle, patient. She always said, don't ever let anger guide you, just let time do the teaching. And time was about to teach our son everything I no longer needed to say. By the end of the week, the process was done. I didn't tell anyone, didn't post anything, didn't visit. I just let the silence work. Then the phone calls started, first from an unknown number, then another. Then his name popped up on the screen. I didn't answer. The next morning I was sitting at the small diner across the street sipping coffee when I overheard two people talking. Apparently, my son had been trying to refinance the house and the bank refused. He was confused, said his name wasn't showing on the documents anymore. The more he pushed, the more tangled it got, and by afternoon his voice reached me again through voicemail. Angry, desperate, loud. Dad, what did you do? The bank's saying the property's not under my name. I told you to stay out of this. Why can't you just leave things alone for once? I played that message twice, not because I liked hearing it, but because it reminded me of how far he'd fallen from the man I'd hoped he'd become. He thought this was punishment. He didn't understand it was protection. I wasn't taking from him. I was keeping him from drowning deeper in debt, in arrogance, in illusions. The next few days went quiet again. I knew he was scrambling, calling people, checking papers, trying to fix something he didn't own. Then one morning I got a knock at my door. When I opened it, there he was and my son. His eyes were dark, tired, his shirt wrinkled, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. Dad, he said, trying to steady his tone, I just need to talk. Just 5 minutes. He looked smaller now, not in size, but in spirit. Pride had a way of shrinking a man when life finally talked back. I stepped aside slowly. "Come in." He walked in, looking around my small apartment like he couldn't believe this was where I lived. It was quiet, clean, peaceful. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. He sat down at the table, rubbing his palms together. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Just stared at the floor, searching for words that didn't exist. When he finally looked up, his voice broke.
"I didn't mean—"
"All that, Dad, I was just angry." I said nothing. He swallowed hard. "But the police came today. They said there's some issue with the documents. And," he hesitated, "and there's an investigation about some money I didn't even know I owed." I took a slow breath, then met his eyes. "It's just the start," I said quietly. His brows furrowed. "The start of what?" "Of learning," I said. He looked down again, hands trembling now. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far away, carried on the wind. He thought the world was his stage. Now it was closing in, and I knew the real reckoning hadn't even begun yet. He sat across from me, his breath shaky, his shoulders hunched, a boy trapped in a man's body. The silence between us stretched so long that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. He looked up, his eyes red, his voice unsteady. "Dad, they said the company's under investigation. Fraud or something. My name's all over the documents." I didn't move. Didn't flinch. I simply folded my hands, resting them on the table. "Whose company?" I asked softly. He frowned, confused. "Mine, Carter Real Estate. You know that." I tilted my head slightly, almost as if I were studying him for the first time. He'd taken over my old business after I retired, changed the name, claimed it as his own. He thought he built it from the ground up, never realizing the ground itself was mine. "What did you sign recently?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "Some new investments, some partnerships. My friend said it would expand the company." I let out a slow breath. There it was, the word friends. The same ones who cheered when he insulted me, who clapped when he threw me out. Now they were nowhere to be found. "I see," I said. "And did you read the contracts?" His lips pressed together. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence grew heavier. Then a knock on the door, firm, sharp, rhythmic. He froze. I stood up, walked to the door and opened it. 2 officers stood there, their badges gleaming in the afternoon light. "Good afternoon, sir," one of them said. "We're looking for Mr. Eric Carter." My son's voice trembled behind me. That's me." The officer nodded. "We just need to ask you a few questions down at the station. It won't take long." I turned slightly and looked at him, not as a father, but as a man looking at another man about to face his own choices. He stood up slowly, his face pale, his hands shaking. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but words failed him. The officer stepped closer. "We'll need you to come with us." And in that moment I saw it. The same arrogance that once filled him had drained out completely. All that was left was confusion, fear, and a faint glimmer of regret. He turned to me, desperate. "Dad, please, I don't understand what's happening." I looked at him quietly. "You will," I said. And that was all. The officers led him outside. I stood at the doorway, watching as they opened the car door. He looked back once, his eyes wide, searching for mercy that I wasn't offering this time. The car pulled away. The street went silent again. I closed the door, and in that quiet apartment the air felt heavy but clear. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was release. The weight of years and of disrespect, of shouting, of mockery was gone. Not because I fought back, but because truth had finally done its work. I walked back to the table, sat down and picked up my coffee mug. It had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Cold truth suited me better now. That evening I took a slow walk to the park a few blocks away. Children played on the swings, their laughter floating in the breeze. Old folks sat on benches talking about the weather, about prices, about how life used to be cheaper and kinder. I sat under a tree, the same one I used to bring my son to when he was little. Back then, he'd sit on my lap, playing with my beard, calling me Super Dad. Now he sat in a police station, and I wondered when that title had died. I watched the sky change colors, gold, orange, then purple. It reminded me of something my own father once said. "Every sunset looks beautiful, son, but only because the day finally learned when to end, and I understood. Some relationships end that way too. The next morning I got another call, this time from the lawyer again. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "your son's assets are frozen until the investigation clears, but the original ownership of the company and house remains with you as the legal holder." I nodded. "Good," I said. "Leave it that way." He paused. "Would you like to bail him out?" "He's been detained for questioning." I looked out the window. A delivery truck rolled by, sunlight bouncing off its mirror. Children walked to school in their uniforms. Life moved forward, indifferent, calm. "No," I said. "He needs to learn what respect costs." Days passed. Neighbors began to talk, whispers spreading faster than the truth itself. Some pitied him, some judged him. But no one came to ask me why I wasn't helping, because those who knew me already knew the answer. A man doesn't stop loving his son when he walks away. He just stops saving him from the lessons he's supposed to learn. That evening, as I sat at the diner again, the waitress, a kind old lady named Marlene, looked at me and said, "Mr. Carter, I heard about your boy. You holding up all right?" I smiled faintly. "I'm fine, Marlene. Just watching life play fair for once." She nodded, poured me another cup of coffee and walked away. I took a sip, leaned back, and looked out the window. The city lights flickered like old memories, some bright, some fading, and in that reflection I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Peace, not victory, not revenge. Just peace, the quiet kind that comes when you finally stop speaking and let consequences do the talking. By the end of the week, word got around that my son was released. Not cleared, just released on bond. He had nowhere to go. His friends had vanished, his accounts were empty, and the house he'd thrown me out of was now legally sealed. I knew he'd come eventually. And when he did, I'd be waiting. Not to forgive, not to punish, but to show him what manhood really means. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom, disguised as stillness, and I'd mastered it well. The next morning broke quietly. The sun rose, but for Marcus, my son, there was no peace in its warmth. The house that once felt alive with his arrogant laughter now echoed with silence and unease. He woke up to a strange heaviness. His phone was buzzing constantly. Unknown numbers, missed calls, and one message from his friend Jerome. "Yo, man. What's going on? Cops at your place?" Marcus frowned. "Cops? What the hell?" He muttered. He threw on his robe and rushed downstairs, still half asleep and irritated. Just then there was a loud knock. Not the usual kind, and it was sharp, firm, and official. When he opened the door, 2 officers stood in front of him. Their badges glinted in the morning light. "Marcus Thompson?" one of them asked. Yeah, that's me. I'm Officer Daniels, and this is Officer Harris. We have a notice to serve you regarding property ownership and pending fraud investigation." Marcus blinked. "What, fraud? That's a mistake." Officer Daniels handed him a neatly folded envelope. Marcus tore it open, his hands trembling. The document inside was clean, precise, and terrifying in its simplicity. Notice of ownership transfer. Owner Harold Thompson. Authorized by State of Georgia Property Division. Marcus's breath hitched. But this is my house. I paid the bills." The officer looked at him calmly. "Sir, this property has been under your father's name for over 20 years. You've been residing here as an occupant, not an owner. It's all legal. You may want to contact him." The world around Marcus started spinning. He stepped back, bumping into the doorframe, eyes darting around the living room. Every corner suddenly unfamiliar. The expensive paintings he bragged about, the marble floor he mocked his father for sweeping, the furniture he bought to impress guests, none of it was his. "Dad, he can't do this," Marcus stammered, voice cracking. He wouldn't, but deep down he knew. His father could. And he would, not out of hate, but out of principle. The officers continued. "Sir, we'll need to ask you a few questions regarding the credit accounts tied to this address. There are some irregularities." Marcus tried to stay composed, but his arrogance was gone. His voice trembled. "Wait, I didn't do anything wrong. I just took over some payments after he left. That's all." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Officer Harris said flatly. "But we'll need you to come with us for a short inquiry." Marcus's knees weakened. He sank into the couch, running a hand through his hair, disbelief written all over his face. The neighbors started peeking through their curtains. Whispers began, the same whispers he once fueled when he bragged about buying this house. "Mr. Thompson," the officer said, "you may want to grab a jacket." Marcus stood, his pride stripped bare. Every confident step he once took now echoed with regret. He turned once more toward the living room, and his eyes landed on a small wooden frame sitting on the shelf. It was an old photo of him and his father, back when they still smiled together. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it felt like the last thing he truly owned. As the officers led him outside, the morning wind carried faint voices. One neighbor whispered, "Ain't that old Harold's boy?" "What happened?" Another said softly, "Guess karma came knocking, huh?" Marcus felt the weight of every word, every insult he'd thrown at his father. Every moment of disrespect had come full circle, and somewhere, a few miles away, Harold Thompson is sitting quietly on his porch, sipping coffee. Got a call. "Mr. Thompson," the lawyer said, "the property notice has been served, and your son's situation is now being handled legally." Harold closed his eyes for a moment. No smile, no satisfaction, just silence, he whispered softly, almost like a prayer. "Maybe now he'll learn what real value means." The phone hung silent. The old man sat there, the early sun painting his bald head gold, his short grey beard catching the breeze. He didn't look back, didn't boast, didn't even tell anyone. He just watched the horizon, a father who had already said everything he needed to say, by saying nothing at all. Marcus sat in the back of the police car, his hands trembling as the city passed by in a blur. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off shop windows, each blink reminding him that everything he thought he controlled had slipped from his grasp. He was silent for once. His mind, usually filled with noise, excuses, bravado, laughter, was now an empty hallway of echoing guilt. The car stopped in front of a government building downtown. A small crowd had gathered outside, drawn by curiosity. They whispered, pointed, filmed with their phones. Marcus had always loved attention, but this was different. Every stare felt like a dagger. The officers escorted him inside. A reporter outside shouted, "Is it true your own father owns the house you were claiming?" Marcus's jaw tightened. He said nothing. For once he didn't have a smart answer. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and cold metal. They led him to a small grey room where a woman in a navy suit sat waiting, her tone calm but firm. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "we're reviewing a few financial irregularities. Your father's name appears on all property and business documents. However, your recent activities show attempts to access funds under his company's name." Marcus frowned, confused. "I didn't steal anything. I was just trying to handle things while he was gone." The woman's gaze didn't soften. "Without authorization, that's still illegal use of funds." He sank lower in his chair, sweat forming at his temples. "Look, I didn't mean... I thought it was my right. I'm his son." She sighed quietly, as if she'd heard this story 1,000 times. "Being his son doesn't make you his partner. Your father's company is private, and his signature is required for everything. You've been living off his trust, not your own work." The words hit him harder than any slap could. For years he mocked his father, called him slow, outdated, foolish. Yet now every paycheck, every meal, every comfort he ever enjoyed came from that same man's hands. Meanwhile, across town, Harold sat quietly in his modest office. His assistant, a woman in her 40s named Evelyn, entered with a hesitant look. "Sir, the news is spreading fast," she said softly. "People are talking. They know Marcus was detained. Reporters are already calling this poetic justice." Harold leaned back in his chair, his face calm but tired. "Let them talk," he said. He brought this on himself. Sometimes silence is the only lesson that sticks. Evelyn nodded slowly. "You're not pressing charges, are you?" "No," Harold said after a pause. "He's still my son, but I won't protect him from the truth anymore." Back at the station, Marcus was released on bail later that afternoon. The officers handed him back his phone, his wallet, and the same papers that shattered his pride. When he stepped outside, the same crowd was still there. Only now the tone had changed. One man whispered, "That's the guy who threw out his old man." Another shook his head. "His father owns everything he bragged about." "Karma, man. Pure karma." Marcus kept his eyes down, trying to block out the murmurs. His old college friends, the ones who once envied his success, had seen it all on social media. His phone buzzed again. Group chat messages lit up the screen. Tyler: "Bro, this real? You kicked out your dad and now he owns your house?" Darnell: "Man, that's cold. Can't even lie you had this coming." Lena: "I used to think you were the most confident man I knew. Turns out you were living in your dad's shadow." He dropped the phone into his pocket, his chest burning with shame. The walk home, or what used to be his home, felt like miles of regret. When he reached the familiar driveway, a new sign was posted on the gate: "Property owned by Harold Thompson. No trespassing without permission." The lawn was trimmed, the porch newly painted, the lights bright, but it wasn't his anymore. His key no longer fit the lock. He stood there, his reflection in the glass door staring back, tired, disheveled, and hollow. He'd lost more than a house. He'd lost the respect of everyone who once believed in him. He turned and walked away slowly. For the first time, he didn't care if anyone saw him cry. The tears fell freely, hot, bitter reminders of the man he could have been. As he disappeared down the quiet street, Harold stood inside, hidden behind the curtain. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just whispered softly to himself, "Now he'll understand what a man's name really means." The old man's hand rested on his cane, his longer grey beard brushing against his chest. He had aged gracefully, proud, patient, and wise. His silence had taught what words never could. And outside, under that same Georgia sky, a son finally began to feel the weight of his father's worth. The morning sun crept through the blinds of Harold Thompson's modest living room. The air was quiet, not heavy with anger, but with peace. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat in his old wooden chair, and looked at the photo on the mantelpiece. A younger Marcus smiling with his arm around him, long before pride poisoned their bond. It had been 3 weeks since the incident. The town had moved on, but the Thompson family name still echoed in whispers, not as gossip, but as a lesson. Harold's phone buzzed. Evelyn's message read, "Sir, Marcus has been asking to meet. He's been at the shelter downtown since last week." Harold looked at the message for a long moment, his wrinkled hands steady on the cup. He didn't reply. Not yet. Across town, Marcus sat on the edge of a cot in a quiet church shelter. His face was thinner now. The arrogance that once lit his expression had dissolved into something humbler, something human. His clothes were clean but old, his once perfect fade now grown out and rough. He hadn't looked in a mirror properly in days. He replayed that night in his mind, the shouting, the words, the door slamming shut behind his father. Every scene now felt like a wound reopening. He had been so sure that youth meant wisdom, that loudness meant power. He had mistaken cruelty for confidence and humiliation for strength. But now, stripped of his friends, his car, his luxury, he understood what silence really meant. He looked down at his trembling hands and whispered, "Dad, I was wrong." Meanwhile, Harold sat with his attorney at the office. On the desk lay a new document, crisp, white, and deliberate. "Are you sure you want to change your will again, Mr. Thompson?" the attorney asked carefully. "You just updated it last year." "Yes," Harold replied softly, his voice calm but firm. "This time, I'll make it final." The attorney adjusted his glasses. "And your son?" Harold's eyes met his. There was no anger there, just quiet clarity. "He'll get one thing," he said. "The key to the house, but not the deed. Let him learn the value of shelter before the value of ownership." The attorney nodded. "Understood, sir." Harold signed the papers, the pen gliding slowly across the line. Each stroke felt like a closing chapter, not of hate, but of hard-earned wisdom. That evening, as the sun began to sink behind the Atlanta skyline, Marcus gathered his courage and walked toward his father's street. His steps were slow, almost hesitant. Every sound of gravel underfoot felt like a reminder of what he'd thrown away. The house looked the same as always, simple, strong, and alive with memories. The porch light glowed softly against the darkening sky. He stood at the door, heart pounding, and knocked, once, twice. Inside, Harold looked up. He recognized the rhythm of those knocks, the same one Marcus used as a child after coming home from school. For a moment, he closed his eyes. Then, slowly, he rose and walked to the door. He opened it halfway. Marcus stood there, head bowed, hands shaking. "Dad," his voice cracked, "I don't deserve to be here, but I didn't know where else to go." Harold said nothing. His gaze was steady, unreadable. The years of disappointment, the hurt, the memories, all swirled in silence between them. "I'm not here for money," Marcus said quickly. "Not for the house, not for the company. I want you to know I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. You didn't deserve it." His voice trembled, raw with regret. "You gave me everything, and I called you useless. You raised me, and I threw you out. I thought I was strong, but I was just loud. I thought you were weak, but you were the strongest man I've ever known." Harold studied him for a long time. His expression softened slightly, not forgiving yet, but no longer cold. He spoke quietly. "Marcus, you thought you owned the house because you lived in it. But ownership isn't about papers or walls. It's about respect. You lost the house when you lost that." Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes glistened. "I know." For a moment, neither moved. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed, but here, time stood still. Then Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned brass key. He held it up between them. "This," he said softly, "is still yours. Not because you earned it, but because you'll need it when you finally do." Marcus looked at the key, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Dad, I don't deserve it." Harold nodded slowly. "No, you don't. Not yet. But someday if you become the man your mother hoped you'd be, maybe you will." He placed the key in Marcus's hand, turned, and closed the door gently, not in anger this time, but in peace. Marcus stood there on the porch, clutching the key like it was the last piece of his soul. He stared at the closed door for a long time, then sat on the steps, silent beneath the stars. He didn't knock again. He didn't call out. He just sat, there, head in his hands, realizing that the man he had once called useless had just taught him the greatest lesson of his life, the power of quiet strength. Later that night, Harold sat back in his chair by the window. He glanced at the porch, saw his son sitting outside, and sighed softly. He didn't move to open the door again. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered, in the E. "Quiet of the room," he murmured. "A father's silence can shake a man harder than any shout." The clock ticked on. The porch light flickered gently, casting a warm glow on the steps where Marcus sat, no longer shouting, no longer proud, just a man learning what love and respect truly meant. And as the night deepened, one truth hung in the still air: pride can throw you out, but humility can bring you home.